They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Cathryn Ryan, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. Well, now, having a child who turns up his or her nose at a variety of foods, which often excludes vegetables, can send parents, well, I don't know, sometimes to a great lengths of frustration. But how do you tell between whether it's just a fussy eating phase or a restricted eating problem? And if it persists, how and where do you seek help? With us, Dr. Conlon, a senior lecturer in the School of Sport, Exercise and Nutrition at Massey University. Hi, Kath.
Hi there.
And with us too, Emily Jones, also from Massey, who's a speech and language therapist and who runs the ACTIVeating Clinic, which treats children with restrictive eating. Good morning to you.
Hi, Cathryn.
You've done a documentary on this topic together. Can you define what we're talking about with restrictive eating?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think one of the things we'd like to get up front is that we really don't like to put labels onto children. I think fussy eating is something that, most parents, as you've identified, are going to face at some point. It's a really common developmental stage. About 1 in 3 children are probably going to face some kind of food restriction or food refusal at some point. And so there isn't really one characteristic that we can say, that defines a fussy eater and that defines a restrictive eater. What we tend to be more concerned about is we're really concerned about the variety of foods that a child eats. So for a normal fussy eater, as long as they're having that variety of foods so that they get all the nutrients that they require, then you can be reassured. But those children that really restrict the number of foods, and particularly if they restrict a whole food group, then we start to get a little bit more concerned.
Restricting a food group, so we're talking about what? No vegetables, or no? Just give us some examples, perhaps, that might help illustrate
sure.
the difference between that annoying phase that you persist with and something where you may have more of an issue, or you may really need to do something to compensate, perhaps because something's missing from the diet. Give us some examples.
Yeah, so food groups. So when we talk about food groups, you're quite right. We talk about vegetables and we talk about all the vegetables. So we talk about vegetables and fruit, and we talk about milk or milk alternatives. And so that's what we really mean. If they're excluding a whole food group, so if they're not eating any vegetables or any fruit, then, that's time to do something.
Another way also, I guess, when I look out for red flags around restrictive eaters, we'd expect, I'd be concerned if children had maybe less than 20 base foods in their diet. As Kath said, if they were restricting whole food groups or whole food textures, they had trouble eating hard to chew foods. If also they had more immature feeding skills, which you see where they're not having those hard to chew foods, especially things like harder meats or unprocessed fruit and veg.
What ages are in play for both situations? Just your average picky eater, and for something where you'd want to act. What age does this often occur?
Okay, so for your normal fussy eater, that generally occurs somewhere between 18 months to 3 years of age. And then if it persists beyond that, particularly when we start to see real restriction in key foods that we're concerned about, then we're talking being a little bit more concerned after that normal age range.
Yeah.
The base foods, 20 base foods, what would they be?
So you kind of thinking about, as Cass said, with food groups. So I kind of give parents a chart, and we'd have, so protein would be, I'd say, how many proteins that child have, how many fruit and vegetables, how many kind of grains and other carbohydrate foods do they have altogether. So kind of, I sometimes look at, 30, so 10 carbs, 10 proteins, 10 fruit and veg. And I think if they have less than 20, that's quite restrictive. And I mean, I've had children who had less than that who've come to our clinic. But sometimes what you'll see, it could be that they have a lot of those carb foods, so breads and crackers and things like that, but are missing proteins and missing fruit and veg.
Proteins being your milk, your cheese, yogurt type foods, and meat as well, often an important source of that. Yeah. Veggies, are they often the problem?
Very often. In fact, it's usually what we find is that that's what parents are most concerned about, is that children are not eating enough vegetables. And then the other hard to eat food is, of course, meat, particularly if it's not been processed in some way, such as a burger or a sausage. It can be quite a hard food to eat.
What are some of your solutions for the ordinary fussy kid? The veggies, the old trick is just to grate it up till they can't see it, right?
Do you know, so Cathryn, that's a really interesting one, because if you grate vegetables and you put them into one of your main meals, and those vegetables kind of get absorbed, something like a lasagna or in a
there's nothing left? Is that what you're going to tell me?
Yeah, and then are we actually teaching children to eat vegetables? Or are we actually sneaking them in by hiding them in those foods and just being happy that that child has accepted them?
Well, if they're two. Well, give me some advice then for different ages, for ways that you believe they can be encouraged to have a good enough diet, a round enough diet. What are some of the tips?
So one of the things that we think is really important is that children actually need to learn to eat. I think it's something that we forget. You know, you often see parents teaching their children to read, helping them to learn to walk, helping them to learn to write. But when do we actually sit down and teach children how to eat? And I think particularly with some of those harder to eat foods, or when you're trying to get a child to accept a new food, we forget that, you know, that child is going to want to know something about that food. They want to know that it's safe to eat, that it's going to taste like something that they're familiar with, that maybe it's going to be a little bit more difficult to chew. Perhaps they've got to move it around their mouth, get it onto their back teeth and start chewing it. And I think that's definitely something that we forget to do.
I've had others give the same advice. Often one of the best ways to get a fussy eater eating is to help prepare, because they do seem to have a thing, kids, about whether they can trust what's coming their way. It's funny because at various stages they seem to eat anything and everything, including dirt and worms. But at a certain age that seems to be a thing. Can you elaborate, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes right back, because it's not just helping out with preparing food. We need to talk to children in the supermarkets about when we're shopping and choosing foods. We need to get them into the gardens and helping to grow foods. And if children are involved with those choices and then involved with the preparation of food, that's a great way that they then learn about the foods. They're more likely to accept them. And even, cutting up soft vegetables with a blunt instrument, great. Because you can always get a child to taste foods as you're preparing it, and that's another great way to expose them and get them involved.
Kath, this is about investing time, and has this become part of the problem in some ways? Everyone is so darn busy and rushing, and not only do you want to ideally be sitting down together, hopefully, and dining together where you can teach some of these skills.
That's right.
But also, what was I just going to say? Just spit out of my head. There's patience sometimes. There's patience and time. We all are eating so fast these days.
Yeah, I think in the States they reckon that families are eating one meal per day in the car. And you think, oh, I'd never do that. But actually we do, because, you know, if you've got other kids or you're picking them up from school and you're transporting them to the next sporting activity, and, you know, you do feed children in the car. And we are all time pushed. You know, breakfast, it's no longer, you don't sit round a table with your family eating breakfast or even other meals. And so I think we have to find some really good solutions for parents in this kind of time-poor environment that we have.
Emily, what do you do with the ACTIVeating Clinic?
Oh, so we have an interprofessional clinic, so it's run by SL speech language therapists and dietetic students with us at the university, and we mainly see, I guess, children who have more restrictive diets. So they usually come to us with the less than 20 foods. What we do, we have a mixture. We sometimes have groups that come together, because we often find it's nice for children to learn off their peers, and but also for some children they really prefer, and we get better results in a one-to-one situation, because sometimes the noise of a group or just having other smells around them, we need to kind of really contain that for them so that they are getting more confidence, trying to get up their hierarchy and accepting difficult to eat foods.
Are there some underlying issues? I think another category we're going to talk about them in a moment, because we've got some emails on it, is this question of children who have food restrictions, perhaps because of allergies. And I don't want to get confused again. When we use that word restricted eating problem, is that more the child's own dislike of a range of foods and inclination towards limiting the range of foods?
I think what I find a lot of, and it's often not obvious to people, but these children have immature feeding skills. They're often not, so for instance, to have harder to chew foods, our tongue needs to lateralise and move side to side. Some children just aren't doing that. And, they're speaking, their speech is okay and things like that. You're not picking up that there's something wrong, but there's these subtle differences. And these are the children who, they're missing that, and it could be, and sometimes a red flag could be that they've been having a lot more milk in their diets. They could be still having bottle feeds because it's been easier to get things in that way. But a lot of these children, I find, have immature feeding skills. They might also have difficulties with touching certain textures, not just food, but they again have trouble touching things like sand and dirt and doing just that play in preschool. And also I find there's a lot of family stress when they come. So it's definitely affecting kind of every mealtime. And so family stress is really emphasised because we know we eat so many times a day. And so when every meal is stressed, that leads to a lot of family stress.
And is it a self-perpetuating cycle? The stress around meals can increase the stress on the family, which then increases the stress the child is feeling.
Oh, look, definitely. And, I think I have so many parents who come in who they're just completely stressed out. And you've got to think too, sometimes you've got two parents who've come from, they've been brought up differently. They've got different parenting styles as well. And especially when you have a child who does have a real restrictive eating difficulty, it's really hard for other people to understand. And it could be people in their own family. And they've been getting advice from all sorts of people, their mother's group, in-laws, their own parents. And that just leads to a huge amount of stress and feeling, as a mother and a family, oh, what am I doing wrong? And I think a lot of mums come in feeling very, very stressed. And that's, I think, a really important thing for me to say. This is nothing to do with you. This is something that has eventuated, and we're there to help and give you strategies.
Do they often tend to choose certain types of foods? I think you mentioned high carbs before. Are these children often attracted also to processed foods? Is it anything to do with the colour or the texture of vegetables, or having seen perhaps a slab of unprocessed meat? What are some of the factors in their decision making, if there's any pattern?
Look, we do find that a lot of children will go, we kind of call it the beige brigade or 50 shades of beige. They really like foods that, and I think for them too, different colours, bright colours we eat with our eyes first. And so some of that can be quite visually overwhelming for some children. So they do go for those more beige and white foods. So that's where you're seeing the bread, potato sticks. And look, processed foods, and look, I guess I'm thinking particularly for children restrictive eating. Look, for me, I use processed foods a lot because it's a bridge to get to the foods I want them to get to. So, with processed foods like chicken nuggets, it's one texture. So it's easier if you have a child who has delayed oral motor skills or finds things quite overwhelming, quite sensitive in their mouth. Those processed foods are easier to eat. And so what I want to do is, though, I want to grade them from that processed food. So, for example, I do something called food chaining, and we say go from something they eat like chicken nuggets, and I will slowly progress them to get to a harder and harder meat texture, but at a pace that they're used to, and then I'm doing it and giving them the skills along the way. Making sure they can tolerate that.
A question here. My 7-year-old son eats very few foods. It's the same thing each day. He gags and sometimes vomits when he tries new foods, or if it's a texture he doesn't like. What can we do to help him? We're waiting for a paediatric appointment, but what's your response?
Okay, we would definitely recommend that the first line should be actually going to your GP and doing exactly what you've done, getting that referral and waiting for that referral. Because for very complex cases, and there does sound as if there are some issues here around the choking and things like that, is that you really want that whole medical team around you so that you're assessed for everything.
Okay, thank you. Another one. I have a nearly 5-year-old who has FPIES, food protein enterocolitis syndrome. which entails serious allergies to dairy, soy, chickpea and egg. She also gets stomach migraines, which she's only recently been diagnosed with, but we think it existed throughout her life. The triggers seem to be chocolate, stress and a tummy too full or too empty. Can your advice on fussy eating please cover what to do with kids with food restrictions? My specific question would be, how do we encourage her to eat enough protein?
Okay. Oh, because I guess you've given us a bit of a medical diagnosis there. I'm very clear when people come. I need to know. I can't have children who are allergic to things in our clinic. There's other kids around. So I think for that, I really need has to be seen by a doctor and a dietitian. For me too, I said that the dietitians assess our children first, because I need to know what is missing, what are they missing nutritionally, so that I can work on helping them with their texture progression. So I would need advice from a dietitian before they came to me.
It really is a specialist's specialist's issue. Are we seeing? I guess I mentioned the availability about eating fast is one thing, but the availability of fast foods, the sheer preponderance of them. Are there some children for whom the enjoyment of those foods mean they're just not interested in anything else, and trying to get something that's been produced at home out of the garden even is a real battle? Is that common?
I think we're all under that pressure, aren't we? I mean, we're time poor. We have greater reliance on those convenience foods. Emily's already highlighted that those more processed foods are easier to eat. So I think we're all under that pressure, and I think that it's important that we remember that the current recommendations are that children have 3 meals a day and 2 snacks, but maybe thinking about those snacks and trying not to use those processed snacks, because the snacking time is a good time to encourage fruits and vegetables, and then to make sure that they're not full up by the time it comes to the meal time.
Couple more emails. My 4-year-old refuses all fruit and vegetables except roast potatoes. I can't seem to get her to even try anything, even when her brother is eating everything in front of her. She started to refuse other things now, as I feel she thinks she can get away with it. I'm worried about nutrients.
Yeah, we need fruit and vegetables in our diet, so I can understand why this mum is worried. And I think that it does create that stressful situation, but she can see that the other child is eating those fruits and vegetables. So it's obviously not something that she's done. And probably for that child, I'll hand over to Emily.
I had some ideas. Look, again, since fruit and vegetables, she's having a bit of tricky time with that. Look, I do a lot of this, you talk about grading our textures. So, you can, sometimes I start kids right back to, so for example, apples are really, really hard to chew foods. They're hard. So I sometimes use freeze-dried fruit. Kiwi Garden's a good brand that you get in the supermarket, and it's kind of becomes like a dissolvable texture. And there's another brand that does that. Again, you don't have to go that far. You could just do, I use mandolins and things and do really, really thin slices. And just doing those thin slices just make it much easier instead of having a big chunk of fruit and vegetables. And the kids really love doing that. And we do a lot of chopping in our clinic, lots of using different kitchen utensils and in cutting shapes out and things like that. That would be, and just getting her hands on things and getting her to actually be feeling the food. I think it's really important that kids can actually, if they accept things with their hands, often that's a really great way of accepting them into their mouth.
Another. My stepson went through a period where he would only eat white rice. He was about 8 at the time. He grew out of it and has not affected him. A friend's daughter went through a stage where she would only eat raw snow peas and tomatoes. She went through this for a year and finally grew out of it. I guess the question is it often a phase?
It can really depend. I mean, what we see here is we see some great examples of children who went through that phase and obviously did grow out of it. But there are some children, particularly if we find that they've got immature feeding skills that aren't immediately obvious, that they're not going to grow out of that unless they have a little bit of more support and a little bit more training on how to develop those skills. So the answer is yes, some children will, and no, some children won't.
This one's interesting because just reading it, I'm not sure how restrictive this diet is, and I'm interested in your take on it. This emailer says, my granddaughter has a very restrictive diet, will only eat foods served a certain way. She'll eat chicken wraps, but not roast chicken, lasagna and spaghetti bolognese. She does eat some fruit but not vegetables. She likes milk with chocolate powder, cornflakes, and that's about it. Advice, please. I don't have an age, but... Yeah.
I wonder, it's interesting when you said about the chicken wraps, I wonder, a lot of the time I will pair familiar foods that they accept with a new food. So, for example, a lot of the kids, they love crackers. And so often I'll try and put some new foods on that safer food. And I wondered if this child likes having chicken in the wrap because it's easier for her to, she prefers that instead of having it without. And a lot of kids, they love having crunchy coatings, especially on meats. That's a really nice thing to do, is to put things in, to bread them. And then if you want, you can make it a bit more coarse with, wholemeal coatings. But kids really love that. Makes it easier for them.
One more here. I have a 5-year-old that eats a pretty good range of things, picky about fruit and veg, but I do get a few of them in, or does get a few of them in, but really struggles when it comes to red meat and chicken. Occasionally she's happy to eat a lamb cutlet or a chicken tender, but flat out refuses mince and steak. I wonder if this falls into the hard to chew category, and if that's a problem in itself, or she'll eventually grow into it.
Is there an age? Did you?
5.
5, yeah. Look, yeah, I think for me, yeah, I find it really useful to especially I think after age about 15 to 18 months, if they're still having difficulty. It's been interesting to try and evaluate that. Just advice in the meantime, though, look, she's really on the right track with the chicken tenders. Again, that's like that chaining. So you can go to nuggets, popcorn, chicken, then go tenders, and then try more fillets, keeping them crumbed, and then eventually working up to roast chicken. Same with steak. Look, with steak, I would try and I would go back to having much more thin slices of meat, if proper, even starting with luncheon, and then working your way, kind of grading up from there. It means going sausages. She said she didn't like mince, did she? But something in between, just something that is a bit more graded down instead of a big piece of steak. So maybe those, if you get it in those goujon, or just having the stir-fry steak pieces, maybe a better way.
One last one. My 3 children are all picky eaters. They're constantly focusing on sweet and processed foods. How normal is this? Are we bad parents? A family member was being very negative and hassling us about this.
Oh, I know. I get really cross when I hear those things.
Ages 9 to 13.
Look, I just want to what Kath said. Look, I am very much around and what the guidelines say about 3 main meals and snacks. What I would try and do is for snack times, I try and put people on a bit of a schedule. So with my more restrictive feeders, I really want parents to concentrate on volume for their main meals so that the stress is taken out. And snack time, I want them to try something new. So, for example, I'll often get them to have maybe fruit, a slice of apple and yogurt, or some carrot sticks and hummus. And if they don't even eat that snack, say they don't have it, I don't want anyone to stress out, because in less than 2 hours, their main meal is coming with something that they'll like. And I think it's really important. I think we really react to kids being hungry. And I think it's going, oh, look, that's great, you're hungry, because you're going to eat lots at dinner time. And to really schedule it out, I think, just have a bit of a schedule happening for yourself, so you know that in less than 2 hours, there's going to be another meal.
Okay, thanks both of you very much to Emily Jones and Dr. Cathryn Conlon.